Hi everybody, my name is Reagan and this is my computer. Today I want to show you how to assemble a computer. I want to make a disclaimer to begin with. This is going to be an overview of the process, and the process is going to vary a little bit depending on the specific components and case that you have. But this should give you a really good idea of what's involved. To start out with, my motherboard and power supply are already mounted in place. I did this just so you wouldn't have to watch me tighten 12 different screws at the beginning of this video. So let's start with the central processing unit. This is the CPU. This is where all of the calculations that your computer does takes place. Now this is going to plug into a very specific slot on your motherboard located right here. And a note of compatibility: you want to make very certain that your central processing unit is compatible with the socket on your motherboard. Tools like PC Part Picker, which I mentioned in my previous speech, are really excellent for helping you determine that compatibility. Now, there's a little triangle on the top of this that indicates which direction it needs to be oriented. There will be a corresponding triangle on your socket. So we'll go ahead and line those up. There's a lot of pins that have to go into place, so you'll know when it happens. And there it goes. It seats right into place. And then, once it's in place, you pull this latch over, and that secures it. Now, the next step is your CPU cooler, because that CPU has a tendency to get very hot, and without a cooler, it would melt and no longer be able to do its computations. So this is going to mount on there very simply. It'll just rest against it. There's two hooks on either side of it. So we'll set the top hook as we rest against it. Hold the top hook in place while we set the bottom hook, and then latch that down. Now that fan is going to need power. So there's a little cable off of it, and there will only be one place on the motherboard where this can plug in. In this case, it's got 4 prongs, so we look on the motherboard for a 4-pronged slot. There it is, right next to the RAM slots. Perfect. Now, that fan will be able to get power directly from the motherboard. Only low power devices can pull power directly from the motherboard. Most things will need to be plugged into the power supply as well as the motherboard. Next, we have random access memory. This is very important to the process of your computer running. This is temporary storage that can be read from and written to very quickly. When you have a Word document, you've typed up your full assignment, but you haven't actually saved it to your hard drive yet, this is where it's stored. There are 2 cards, 4 gigabytes apiece in this case. They will always be installed in pairs. You can have generally up to 4 of them. And these can be rather difficult to get seated into place. They require quite a bit of pressure. Don't be afraid to break it. You'll get it in place. As long as you've got it lined up properly, it's going to require a little bit of oomph to get it plugged in. And you can tell there's a slit right there, offset from the center, and that helps you determine the proper orientation of it, because there will be a corresponding slit in the slot. So we'll line this one up right next to the other one. And again, there's the first click, and there's the second click. And now we have the RAM installed. Next is the video card. Not altogether necessary depending on how you intend to use the computer. If you want to do some intensive gaming or video editing, you'll need a separate video card. The motherboard will come with some onboard video solution. You will be able to tell because there will be a port on the back that a monitor cable could plug into. But in this case, we have this video card with ports on the back. There's an HDMI port, a DVI port, and a VGA port. So pretty much any way you want to hook up a monitor, you'll be able to do that with this video card. Orient it in such a way so that those will be accessible from the back of the machine when it's plugged in. Slide that into place right there. And it'll click into place just like the RAM, though not quite as violently usually. And then we'll use one of these thumb screws to hold that in place. It's a pretty heavy card. So you want to make sure that it's properly secured to prevent any damage to the card. That thumb screw in place. And while I'm doing this, we can go ahead and talk about, we've just plugged this in and we know that it is now plugged into the motherboard and can therefore communicate with the central processing unit. So the next step is it needs power. This video card requires way too much power for the motherboard to be able to supply that. So we're going to have to take one of these many cables that are coming off of the power supply and plug them into the video card. In this case, that's these two cables with 6 prongs each for the total of 12 that the video card has. First one plugs in right there on the left. Next one right here on the right. And now the video card has power. The next thing you'll need is some place to store your operating system and all of your files. Most of you will know this as your C drive. In my case, I have a C drive and I have a D drive, and I also have an E drive that's tucked away in the back, hidden from view. The drives, just like the video card, will need to be able to communicate with the motherboard and draw power from the power supply. I already have the cables run from the back. You can possibly see this blue one right here, and then a black cable from the power supply is running to both of these drives. Next, a not altogether essential component anymore, but still useful, is a disk drive, a DVD drive in this case. Not necessary because most programs you can just download directly from the internet nowadays, but still useful for backing up files or watching movies. And with this case, it's very easy to install. It slides right into place right there. And when it's properly lined up, you just latch it, and that's installed. Now that, just like the drives and the video card, needs power, and it needs to be able to communicate with the motherboard. So we've got a power cable that I've already run from the power supply up through the back up to here where it can reach that. Plug that in right there. And the SATA cable that communicates with the motherboard. Plug in right there. Excellent. And that is that component installed. And that's all of the essential components that you need. Now there are additional components that you can add. We're going to go ahead and do one right now. And that is a wireless card. Not necessary, again, because your motherboard will probably have an Ethernet port built in so as to be able to plug in and communicate across the net. In this case, I like a little more freedom. I like to not have to be right next to my router or run a long cable to my computer, so I like to keep that wireless functionality available. These antennas slide through the back of the machine, and this is going to plug in right below the video card in this case. Won't always be the case, but again, you'll always be able to tell because it'll only plug in to one place. And apart from that, you will likely have already verified the compatibility of all these components before you bought them. So you'll know that your motherboard does in fact have a slot for a wireless card of this type. So we'll go ahead and get that in there. Put that thumb screw there, nice and tight. There we go, now it's in there. And that's it, that's the computer assembled. It's a very simple process. Most of the work would have been mounting the motherboard and the power supply, which you didn't see in this video. And again, some variations that you may run into. Sometimes the power supply mounts up here. Sometimes it's down the bottom. I prefer on the bottom because power supplies are pretty heavy. And if you have it mounted up here, then that makes your computer very top heavy. So it just makes more sense to me to have it down here. And this is pretty standard nowadays. If you look at the computers around the school, lots of them, the older Dells, will have the power supply up top, and you can always tell because you can see where the power outlet is on the back of the machine. And that's it installed. We can grab the window, put it in place, slide this closed. This will tighten with just a thumb screw or two. There is technically a second thumb screw for the bottom. I don't usually use it. It's not that necessary. And we're all done. We've got a computer built. I hope you enjoyed the demonstration. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. I'd be happy to take care of anything that you may have questions about. I'd even be happy to record a second video if you want to get a better look at a certain component. Thanks, everybody.